Of all the weapons in the cosmere, none is more iconic than Nightblood. This sentient awakened blade from the planet Nalthis is one of the most powerful and highly invested objects in the entire cosmere. Nightblood is a bit of an enigma. Its creation is shrouded in mystery. It's such a weird and unique case that nailing down exactly what it can, or what it can't do, is somewhat difficult. This video will explore what we know about Nightblood, how it was created, its history, and some of the incredible things the sword can do. But we'll also be talking about what makes it so weird.
I'll be sourcing information from the following books: Warbreaker, the entire Stormlight Archive, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and numerous Words of Brandon. I'll try to avoid story spoilers where I can, but where I can't, I will provide a timestamp for where to skip to. That said, this might be a good video to skip if you haven't read Rhythm of War or Wind and Truth.
Nightblood has been a fascination of mine for over a decade. Some of the first wobs that I ever got from Sanderson were about this incredible sword. And admittedly, some of the fascination that 15-year-old Jason had with this sword is just that, wow, this thing is so powerful, I want to know more about it. But as I've gotten older and learned more about the cosmere and its lore, Nightblood has become fascinating for completely different reasons.
Nightblood is very, very odd. It's one of the most highly invested things in the entire cosmere other than shards. That's more invested than the Bands of Mourning, Aethers, and the Unmade. It's not easy to know where to start when talking about Nightblood, but I think talking about what it is and why it was created is a good place to start. Then I'll move on to the weird and powerful abilities that Nightblood has. It's important to understand that even though Nightblood is currently one of the most highly invested objects in the entire cosmere, it didn't start out this way. As Nightblood consumes investiture, it also seems to be storing it within itself, growing in power over time.
Nightblood is the most ridiculously over-invested thing in the cosmere, second only to the shards.
Yes.
Was this true from the moment of its creation, or did it grow in power over time?
It grew in power over time.
Nightblood is an awakened sword that drips black smoke from its blade. It was created by two of the 5 scholars from the planet Nalthis, Vasher and Shashara. These two were inspired to create their own sword after their world-hopping adventures to Roshar, where they saw the honor blades of the heralds in action. They saw how these blades functioned, but didn't quite understand why they functioned. And I think this disconnect is where some of the weirdness comes from with Nightblood. But I'll get into that a bit later.
Nightblood is commonly seen with a silvery sheath that's made of aluminum. If you know anything about how aluminum works in the cosmere, this should make sense to you. The sheath prevents Nightblood from destroying things around it accidentally, as well as changing some of Nightblood's physical properties. This sheath blocks some of Nightblood's abilities, but not all of them. For example, even when sheathed, Nightblood is able to speak into the minds of those around it, and it can augment the strength of whoever holds it.
We see this in a couple of instances, like in Warbreaker when someone drives sheathed Nightblood through their chest, and we also see this in Oathbringer when Szeth breaks somebody's back with just a swing of sheathed Nightblood. And I do think that this is because Nightblood is augmenting Szeth here, and more than just he's holding Stormlight. The sheath does prevent Nightblood from consuming investiture, and it also blocks its biochromatic aura. The Nightblood Test, which I'll talk about later, works when even a portion of the blade is exposed from the sheath. Nightblood is sentient, at least the real one is, and it has its own thoughts and opinions. Although, because Nightblood is a sword, these thoughts and opinions are a little weird, kind of warped. Nightblood's concept of time is fuzzy at best. It's constantly wondering where its creators are and giving strange and nonsensical descriptions for how much time has passed.
Because Nightblood is a sword, it doesn't really have a gender identity. Vasher refers to the sword with he/him pronouns, and Lift uses she/her. I may refer to Nightblood as he, but that's mostly because I'm more familiar with Vasher's POV than I am with Lift's. Weirdly enough, the other example of an awakened blade we have, Vivenna's blade, is referred to using she/her pronouns as well. Finally, Nightblood can't really see the world around it. We've gotten descriptions via Word of Brandon about how awakened constructs without sensory organs see the world, and it's been described as similar to the steel sight of an Inquisitor. I can only imagine that this is also how Nightblood perceives the world.
As with any awakened construct from Nalthis, breaths, color, and a command were required to create Nightblood.
It took 1,000 breaths initially to awaken the steel that would become Nightblood. That's already a lot of breaths, but it's even crazier when you consider that only someone who's reached the 9th heightening can awaken something made of steel or stone. This means whoever did the awakening had to have 20,000 breaths just for the awakening to work in the first place.
The command used to create Nightblood was Destroy Evil, and Vasher and Shashara were really proud of this command. They loved it for its simplicity, but this simplicity, along with maybe the intent used, is one of the reasons that Nightblood is so weird.
She'd learned to forge the breath of 1,000 people into a piece of steel, awaken it to sentience, and give it a command. That single command took on immense power, providing a foundation for the personality of the awakened object. With Nightblood, she and Vasher had spent much time in thought, then finally chosen a simple yet elegant command: destroy evil. It had seemed like such a perfect logical choice. There was only one problem, something neither of them had foreseen. How was an object of steel, an object that was so removed from life that it would find the experience of living strange and alien, supposed to understand what evil was? The sword wasn't really to blame. It was a terrible, destructive thing, but it had been created to destroy. It still didn't understand life or what life meant. It only knew its command, and it tried very hard to fulfill it.
Because Nightblood is made of steel, something that's never been alive before, it doesn't really have a concept of what evil is. Or maybe it's better to say that the breaths used to create Nightblood didn't have a built-in framework for interpreting the command of what evil is. We'll talk more about how this command is used later.
Nightblood is one of the deadliest weapons in the cosmere, and it consumes any form of investiture, as we learned in this WOB from Baby Jason.
Nightblood, is that using Stormlight?
Yes, Nightblood can feed off of any investiture, including the one inside of people's souls, which is what kills them.
This means one can fuel Nightblood with anything from breaths or Stormlight to something like tapping a metal mind. And because investiture, matter, and energy are the same thing in the cosmere, it can consume those as well. It's very important that whoever uses Nightblood has enough investiture, because if they don't, Nightblood will feed on them. It will consume their body and soul.
Nightblood's appetite for investiture is immense, but it can get full. This next section will contain spoilers for Rhythm of War, so if you don't want those spoilers, skip to this timestamp right here. In Rhythm of War, Nightblood does two things which I consider to be incredible. First, it's able to collapse a perpendicularity, being described as pulling in the power in such a way that it looks like water going down a drain before being plunged into the center of the perpendicularity and collapsing it.
A shadow appeared on the field of whiteness, a shape, the shape of a black sword. This single line of darkness swiped through the line connecting Dalinar to Ishar. The white cord exploded and frayed, trailing wisps of darkness. Ishar was cast away, hitting the stone. The perpendicularity remained open, but its light dimmed to reveal Szeth standing between Dalinar and Ishar, brandishing his strange black shard blade. His illusion melted off like paint in the rain, breaking into light, which was sucked into the sword and consumed. "Where?" Szeth said to Ishar, his voice quiet. "Did you get that blade you bear?" The herald seemed to not have heard him. He was staring at Szeth's sword as it dripped black liquid smoke. Around it, the white light of the perpendicularity warped and was consumed like water down a drain. Szeth spun and stabbed the sword into the heart of the perpendicularity. The Stormfather shouted in anger, and the perpendicularity collapsed, folding in upon itself. Even then, Nightblood wasn't full, and there is a limit to the amount of investiture that Nightblood can consume.
Is there a limit to the amount of investiture that Nightblood can hold?
Yes. There is.
Okay.
The second thing Nightblood does is kill a god. In chapter 113, Taravangian uses Nightblood to kill the vessel of Odium, Rayse, and then ascends to godhood himself. In this instance, Nightblood did get full. His appetite was satiated for a time, and Taravangian described the blade as undulating and then becoming dull.
Even though Nightblood was initially made with awakened steel, it's become something more, something that more closely resembles a god metal.
Is Nightblood and Azure's sword made of the same metal? Not anymore. Is Nightblood made from a normal metal? It is not. Is he made of dragon steel? Good question. He is not.
While on the subject of god metals, I think it's important to bring up that Nightblood is considered a shard blade. And while this might just be a question of semantics, it could be because Nightblood can technically cut through anything, although it is doing a lot more damage to what it attacks than a traditional shard blade. And Nightblood is also sentient, which is a characteristic shared by shard blades and honor blades. I just wonder what the distinction is. Like, when does something become a shard blade? Is it any weapon made of an invested metal? If that's the case, would the Raysium dagger used in Rhythm of War be considered a shard blade? Or is it a question of sentience? How much atium would you need to melt down and forge into a blade before that's considered a shard blade? And would that develop sentience? I just don't know. And maybe it really is just a question of semantics.
As I understand it, Nightblood is most comparable to a shard blade. However, unlike a shard blade, Nightblood requires constant input of investiture in order to realize his full destructive potential. Why is this? Vasher kind of hacked in order to imitate another magic system. Shard blades are organic parts of the world they're on, but Nightblood is a bunch of souls stuffed into something. Nightblood is like a Frankenstein. And then there's this other wob from the r/books AMA from 2015. Can Nightblood be considered a splinter and doesn't function like a spren realmatically? Are there distinct differences, is what I'm asking. Nightblood is kind of its own strange thing. He's an attempt to use one magic to replicate something in another. He's closest to a spren, but kind of like a robot spren, for lack of a better word. When you say that Nightblood is an attempt to use one magic to replicate something in another, do you mean life in general, or are you referring to a specific effect in a specific magic system? There are those involved who knew shard blades existed before they tried the Nightblood experiment. Does this mean Vasher had knowledge of shard blades before creating Nightblood? It means I wrote, and nothing more at this point.
Also, this might sound like a silly question, but why is Nightblood black? Typically, when an object is awakened, the color is leached from a nearby object, and black is a valid color in awakening. Like, it can be used to fuel something, draining it of its color. We do know that the metal that was Nightblood turned black shortly after it was awakened. Could it be something to do with corrupted investiture, midnight essence, or maybe even ruinous investiture? We just don't really know. Do you have any theories for why the metal that Nightblood's made of turned black? I'd love to hear your theories in the comment section down below. Even getting grazed by Nightblood is enough to completely destroy an enemy. It destroys things on all 3 realms of existence, poofing its enemies into a puff of black smoke. The black smoke has actually been described as being very similar to nightmares from Komashi. It's basically the investiture waste that leaks off of the blade, the remnants of its victims. It's hard to oversell just how gone something is when it's killed by Nightblood. Their physical body, gone. Their cognitive aspect, also gone. Their spirit web, you won't believe it, also gone.
Last one, all right.
Last one is Nightblood like the Xyblos from the, I don't know how to pronounce that, from Dragon Steel, where he pulverizes the spiritual aspect and then has the result on the physical? Is that those popping in the smoke?
Yes, he is attacking directly at the spirit.
Attacking directly at the spirit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When drawn, Nightblood consumes the investiture of the person wielding it. If this person runs out of investiture, Nightblood will end up feeding on them and leaving them permanently maimed or killed. The longer Nightblood is drawn, the faster it consumes investiture, and the more he's consumed by his command. While drawn, Nightblood becomes nearly incoherent and is entirely consumed by its need to destroy evil. A lot of the time, Nightblood blacks out during use and doesn't entirely remember what he did while unsheathed. Nightblood is one of the few things that can permanently kill a fused and Thunderclassed. That Thunderclass that Nightblood killed in Oathbringer? Yeah, Yusha is just gone. She's never coming back. Rest in peace, Rocky Gal.
And while this hasn't been explicitly confirmed, I do think Nightblood would provide a permanent end for a Herald or a Spren if it was able to make contact with them. This insane power level doesn't just work on people and invested entities, it also works on objects. When Nightblood is used on a physical object, it also puffs into black smoke, the matter that makes it up being converted into investiture and consumed. The exception to this is aluminum. Nightblood seems incapable of damaging this magically inert metal. As I mentioned earlier, the command used by the 5 scholars to awaken Nightblood was to destroy evil, a command they thought was simple, that led to unforeseen consequences. But what they didn't expect is how the breaths used to awaken Nightblood would interpret that command. With no concept of what evil actually is, it usually defers to the judgment of whoever's wielding it. And this leads us to the Nightblood Test. At multiple points in Warbreaker, Vasher uses this sword to judge the character of those around him. Someone who has a heart corrupted by greed or wants to use Nightblood to destroy their enemies will feel an overwhelming desire to possess it. Once someone evil starts using Nightblood, they are consumed by a bloodlust, and it's almost like the sword wields them. This usually ends with whoever's wielding Nightblood dead, because the last evil thing they target is themselves.
Those who don't want to use it for evil or use it at all feel an overwhelming sense of nausea around the sword, even when sheathed. This feeling can be so powerful as to actually induce vomiting. If someone is repulsed by Nightblood, then they pass the Nightblood test. People who experience this can use Nightblood without being drawn into a bloodlust. After someone successfully uses Nightblood, they form something of a bond with the blade. In the Warbreaker annotations, Brandon says, on another note, here is that Nightblood can sense where Vasher is. This is because Nightblood has ingested and fed off of Vasher's breaths in the past. When he does that, it connects him to someone. It's also, by the way, one of the secrets as to why Vasher doesn't get sick when holding Nightblood, even though he's a good person. It's not simple familiarity, though that's part of it. Nightblood has a built-in test. If he feeds off of you and you survive, then you become somewhat immune to his powers. If someone survives their encounter, they will no longer feel the overwhelming sense of nausea when they're around the sword. Although it is important to emphasize the survival part, Nightblood needs to feed off someone's breath before this nausea truly fades.
And the secret third option for those wielding Nightblood are those that don't feel anything at all. The primary example of this is Szeth, someone who doesn't feel a desire to use the blade or nausea when it's around. The reason behind this is fascinating. It's because Szeth is aligned with Nightblood's intent, to do what he's told.
End of Way of Kings, Szeth meets Nightblood. Nightblood normally makes people feel very sick and blah, 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 does the test.
Yes.
He does not have this. And I'm curious if there's a reason for that other than you didn't want to end your book with Szeth puking in a corner.
No. So Nightblood, what happens when you take Nightblood is based entirely on what your desire and how to use Nightblood is. If your intent does not align with Nightblood's created intent, which is kind of a deep kind of cosmere sort of thing. But basically, if you want Nightblood because you can then destroy all of your enemies, you're not gonna match to that intent. If your desire to use Nightblood is either, number one, I don't even want to use Nightblood, you're actually gonna be fine.
Okay.
Right? Or if your desire to Nightblood is matching what Nightblood's view is, and Szeth is like the perfect person because Szeth only wants to do what he's told, and Nightblood kind of only wants to do what he's told. Okay. And so there's like a perfect alignment. They're both messed up in the same way, and they're both kind of they both view the world in the same way, and they're just like, it's hard to find a more perfect alignment than those two.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there was just no reaction.
Yes.
And that should be something that I wanted people to pick up on.
Awesome. Well, I didn't.
In this way, Szeth is the perfect wielder for Nightblood. His morality is external, and he just wants to do what he's told, just like Nightblood. This next section will contain spoilers for Wind and Truth, so if you don't want those spoilers, skip to this timestamp right here. I'm not sure how much longer the Nightblood test will actually be effective. In Wind and Truth, Nightblood declares that it's not a thing, and that it can choose not to kill its friends. This is some incredible character development on Nightblood's part. After making that proclamation, Nightblood stops pulling investiture from Szeth and Kaladin, stands up on its tip, and clatters to the stone, seemingly unsheathed, but when Szeth blacks out, comes back to, Nightblood is in its sheath, so something happened between those two scenes. I think this change is due to some introspection on Nightblood's part, brought upon it by overhearing the therapy sessions between Szeth and Kaladin. Nightblood even reflects on its own purpose, in Wind and Truth saying, if a human can't distinguish between good and evil, then how can a sword? And this just kind of goes in the face of Vasher's view of Nightblood, which is that an awakened construct can't really grow, doesn't have the capacity for it. But the Warbreaker annotations would seem to indicate that Vasher has always underestimated Nightblood's capacity for growth. Even outside of the annotations, there is some debate about what Nightblood's capacity for growth can be. Vasher thinks it's very limited, but Shashara thinks that Nightblood could become a poet or a scholar if he wanted to.
Note that Nightblood is capable of more change than Vasher assumes. Vasher has a bit of a blind spot when it comes to Nightblood. He makes assumptions he wouldn't make regarding other people or elements of awakening. It's hard for him to regard the sword without bias. If you want to know more about this, read the sequel, if I ever write it, which is tentatively named Nightblood.
Some of Nightblood's abilities are weirdly similar to other powers we see in the Cosmere. It's almost as if he's borrowing from other power profiles, as it were. To explore this, we're going to take a look at everything magical Nightblood can do. This section will contain spoilers for Oathbringer and Wind and Truth, so if you don't want those spoilers, skip to this timestamp right here.
Nightblood is able to forge bonds and grant surges like a Spren or a bondsmith. He learns how to do this after spending time talking to the Honor Blades, which are also self-aware to some extent. He seems to indicate that it's almost a trivial thing to him, that even a Spren can do that.
But you're manipulating connection and spirit webs on such a level that you're granting access to the surges, which are the fundamental forces of the Cosmere. And also, he just casually learned this by talking to some of the other most legendary blades in the entire Cosmere. As a bit of an aside, I'd love to know how those conversations actually went, and if the Honor Blades learned anything from Nightblood.
But that's not all. He's seemingly able to increase the physical speed and strength of those wielding him in a way similar to Allomantic Pewter. He can deepen the colors around him when unsheathed, but this aura that Nightblood exudes is just a little bit different than a typical biochromatic aura that we see. Instead of brightening the colors around him, Nightblood deepens the colors. Reds become maroons, for example. He seems to be pulling the colors towards their perfect or ideal color that we hear about in Warbreaker's chapter 3 and 13. But even that's not everything Nightblood can do. He is able to manipulate the beads in Shadesmar, causing them to coalesce. Nightblood's ability to damage things across realms is similar to both Shard Blades and even a Psyblow from the non-canonical Dragonsteel Prime. He can manipulate connection, and he can form a weak bond. And there's even a wob that says Nightblood would theoretically be able to make a bond with a Spren, although the circumstances around it are very specific and not likely to happen.
Sanderson has also said that Nightblood's ability to influence people's minds and bring them into a bloodlust is similar to rioting, but I think it's closer to the thrill.
The mechanics of Nightblood's revulsion versus compulsion magic. Like, what do you want to know? Is it kind of like rioting? Like when... Oh, okay. When Nightblood...
Yes, there's definitely rioting is a good parallel to that.
It's like his agency being kind of taken away?
I wouldn't say agency is taken away, but it depends on how you view rioting, right?
Okay.
If you are enhancing someone's emotions, it's like here's the question for you: if someone is feeling depressed, is their agency being taken away, right? And this is a question that our society has a really bad answer to, right? So if you're being rioted, strict line, I would say no, your agency isn't being taken away. But you are certainly under the influence of another force, which is taking certain emotions you might have and emphasizing them a great deal. So
is it the same kind of push that makes a good virtuous person want to vomit?
Virtuous might be the wrong way to put it, but yes, that sort of thing is related. It's related to Nightblood, and it's related to how he was created and all of those sorts of things. So.
Both Nightblood and the Thrill pull on people's emotions, leading them to bloodlust. They both also make those opposed to their respective intents nauseous.
Yes, the Thrill can make someone nauseous, and I was surprised to learn this on a recent Oathbringer reread. When Kaladin gets close to the Thrill, he starts to feel some nausea, and this is because Kaladin is so closely aligned with Honor's intent that the Thrill makes him sick. As a matter of fact, Sanderson says being aligned with Honor's intent makes one immune to the Thrill, unless you have a previous connection with it, like a previous bond, as Dalinar does.
Does Kaladin feel the Thrill? No, he does not. Kaladin is immune to the Thrill.
Another bit of Nightblood weirdness is how it manifests in the cognitive realm.
Nightblood manifests distinctly in the cognitive realm. There, he appears as a brilliant glowing mass of light with a sword at its center. He also speaks with a powerful and distorted voice. He even manifests a sheath to go along with him, but this sheath is gold and not a silvery aluminum. Nightblood doesn't seem to realize that he's perceiving Szeth from another realm, which I find interesting.
What's especially odd to me about this change is the sheath. It manifests as this golden gilded sheath when in the physical realm it's aluminum. And aluminum is resistant to magic and is magically inert. So is this just how aluminum manifests in the cognitive realm? I don't really know, but it's pretty weird. I do find it interesting that Nightblood doesn't manifest as a bead in Shadesmar or a patch of mist like they do on Scadrial, but as a brilliant, glowing bonfire of power.
After pondering why Nightblood would appear this way in the cognitive realm when Honorblades and Shardblades don't, we get this from Szeth's POV. The truth of it clicked with Szeth. This was Shadesmar, the land of the mind. Sometimes what appeared here related to how it was perceived. In this realm, Nightblood looked the way it imagined itself.
Szeth even comments how weird it is that Nightblood manifests as a sword. This does make me wonder how objects manifest on the Nalthis subastral. However, I don't think Nightblood is indicative of how objects from Nalthis appear. I just think he's like this because he's highly invested and a special case.
Szeth is able to use cognitive realm Nightblood, even as physical realm Nightblood remains rested against the tree where it was left. But there are some differences relating to what happens to one of Nightblood's victims when used in the cognitive realm. Instead of being turned into dark smoke, they burst into motes of light. When Szeth returns to the physical realm, golden Nightblood vanishes from his hands.
Speaking of realmatic transitions, Nightblood is a world hopper. He started his existence on Nalthis, as I've mentioned many times, a product of the many war created by the Five Scholars. At some point, Nightblood and Vasher left the planet and showed up on Roshar. Why they left, I'm not sure. Maybe Vasher was looking for an all-you-can-eat investiture buffet like you can find in the High Storm. Or perhaps he was assisting Nightblood the Fugitive. In chapter 93 of Oathbringer, we learn that Vivenna is chasing a criminal, and later on in that book, we learn that this criminal she's chasing is Nightblood. What did our poor, innocent, destroying, evil-loving sword do to be branded as a criminal? What could he have possibly done as a sword to be branded a criminal? Granted, a sword that can destroy anything.
Regardless, Nightblood made it to Roshar, but before arriving, Nightblood and Vasher visited at least one other planet. After arriving on Roshar, Nightblood and Vasher had a falling out, and the sword was placed under the care of the Night Watcher, and then into Nail's care before finally being given to Szeth. The epigraphs in Wind and Truth seem to imply that even after the Night of Sorrows, Szeth and Nightblood continued to have adventures together for at least 6 years after Stormfall.
As I've mentioned a couple times in this video, Nightblood has an intent, and that is a capital I intent. It also seems to be different from Nightblood's command. We know that many invested arts require both an intent and a command to work, and this is especially prevalent in Awakening. The command gives the investiture a directive, and the intent provides a framework for interpreting that command.
The commands that Denth taught me were simple phrases: hold things, protect me. He'd implied that intent was important. When she'd awakened her bonds, she'd made them move as if part of her body. It was more than just the command. The command brought the life, but the intent, the instructions from her mind, brought focus and action.
So what is Nightblood's intent? How was he intended to complete his command? While we don't have an official answer to this question, I think we have enough information to try and figure it out. And maybe this is one of the reasons Nightblood is so weird. As I mentioned earlier, if someone is aligned with Nightblood's intent, they don't feel nausea around it or a desire to use the sword. Sanderson indicates that Szeth aligns perfectly with Nightblood's intent to just do what he's told. He also specifies that it is a deep Cosmere lore thing, which I interpret as capital I intent. Nightblood just wants to follow his command to destroy evil. This is his intent to follow his command, which feels very circular. I think one of the reasons Nightblood is so messed up is because Shashara didn't have a clear intent in mind when awakening Nightblood and giving his command, but she was so highly invested being at the 9th heightening that she was basically able just to brute force the awakening, giving this object a command without a clear intent on what she meant by it. While reviewing this part of the script, Audrey of Audonalsium had an interesting thought about Shashara, which I'd like her to share in a minute or two. Nightblood was made as part of a biochromatic arms race during the Many War. The final battle involved Nightblood, and this was the Battle of Twilight Falls. During this battle, Shashara used Nightblood in a very decisive way, winning the battle, and Vasher saw this and was kind of just aghast at the carnage left behind by Nightblood. Shashara wanted to share the information of how to awaken Steel to make something like Nightblood with other people. And Vasher thought, absolutely not, we cannot let this information get out into the world. And because of this, Vasher ended up killing Shashara, who was his wife.
This is our first major clue, though a subtle one at the same time, that there might be something to the religion of the iridescent tones. Lightsong does see something in the painting that an ordinary person wouldn't be able to see. A well-crafted piece of art made by a person channeling the tones and connected to them via breath can speak to a returned. Now, in this case, it doesn't work quite like Larimar says it does. Lightsong doesn't actually prophesy about the Black Sword in the way the priests think. In other words, Lightsong isn't prophesying he'll see the Black Sword, Nightblood, in the day's activities. Instead, Lightsong is seeing an image of a previous war, which is prophetic in that another Many War is brewing, and in both cases, Nightblood will be important to that outcome of the battle. The person Lightsong sees in the abstract painting is Shashara, Denth's sister, one of the 5 scholars, and a returned also known as Glory Singer by the Cult of the Returned. She's seen here in Lightsong's vision as she's drawing Nightblood at the Battle of Twilight Falls. It's the only time the sword was drawn in battle, and Vasher was horrified by the result. It's because of her insistence on using the sword in battle and on giving away the secret to creating more that Vasher and she fought. He ended up killing her with Nightblood, which they'd created together during the days when they were in love. He married her a short time before their falling out. That marriage ended with him slaying his own wife to keep her from creating more abominations like Nightblood and loosing them upon the world. Nightblood is part of a much larger story in this world. He's dropped casually into this particular book, more as a side note than a real focus of what's going on, but his own role in this world is much, much larger than his supporting part would indicate.
Now here's Audrey's interpretation.
Hey, when thinking about Shashara's intent, when speaking destroy evil as the command for Nightblood, I'm really curious about whether or not she actually had it wrong, or if it was fulfilling her original intention. At the Battle of Twilight Falls, Shashara wields Nightblood and kills so many people on both sides of the conflict, and still believes that this is technology that the world needs to know how to create for themselves. It makes me wonder about how much of her understood that the command destroy evil would do just that, kill indiscriminately. It also makes me curious about how susceptible she may have been to what we see happening with the Heralds and their curse doomed to be insane after such long lives. While Shashara wasn't subjected to the same level of insane torture, she did live an unnaturally long life that was colored in many ways by war and conflict. Shashara's desire to still share the knowledge of how to forge a weapon like Nightblood after seeing its devastating, life-ending, altering power makes me really curious about whether or not purify the world was at the heart of her decision to use destroy evil as the command. If that was her intent, if she had those feelings about humanity, I think it makes total sense that that would be what comes out on the other side of a command like that. We just don't know, and it would be great to learn more about her, but those are my thoughts on Shashara.
Thanks, Audrey. And as a bit of an aside before going on, Audrey and I have a podcast. It's called We Know More Than Is Healthy About the Cosmere, the podcast. It's part of a charity initiative called Lift the Bridge. They've partnered with Nerd HQ to help fund the free therapy sessions associated with Sanderson's Next Step coin. If you want to access this podcast, as well as others such as Coffee and Creme with Ghost Buddies and Edge Dancing Through Life, and early access to Rafo's Next Ideal podcast, please consider supporting their Patreon. All the money from that account goes to Nerd HQ to help people get access to the mental health resources they need. There will be a link in the description.
Shashara's intent when giving Nightblood its command doesn't necessarily explain why Nightblood acts as an investiture black hole, consuming everything it can and seemingly storing it and growing more powerful. But it could explain some of the weirdness, a disconnect between its command and intent. There are a lot of theories about what's going on with Nightblood, and some I've heard are that Nightblood was created through the use of a Dawn Shard. That endowment played a direct role in the creation of the sword to serve as a super weapon capable of killing a shard, that Nightblood was made specifically to destroy the evil from Threnody. I could see any of these theories being true, but I'm not sure how much I believe them with the current amount of information we have.
What is certain is that Nightblood's role in the Cosmere cannot be understated. Without this blade that bleeds the darkness, the events of the Stormlight Archive would be drastically different, and perhaps the Cosmere as a whole would be dealing with a different enemy than the one they are now. But we'll just have to wait and see what becomes of this legendary weapon. Do you have any fun theories about Nightblood, its destructive potential, or how it was made? I'd love to hear those thoughts in the comment section down below. But as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe and hype the video if you enjoyed it, and share it with all your friends that enjoy the Cosmere. And a special thanks to my Draconic donors, Dennis, Mac, Matthew, Alex, and Drew. But yeah, that's all I've got for you now. Thank you so much for watching. Have an excellent time of day. And I'm going to continue through Shinovar. This everstorm is no joke. Catch you all next time. Bye. Oh man, it's so stormy.